Right, so with the unfortunate news that Laura Kuenssberg was back presenting her own show this morning, expectation was things would return to Sunday morning normal, with the establishment being well looked after once again. And indeed it looked very much like that today, with her guests including Lord, whoops, I've lost my phone, how careless of me, all that COVID inquiry data that might have been Bethel, and the eternally odious and perennially wrong Piers Morgan, a man you don't talk to about phones either. Standard balance, you might be thinking. Usually the pretense of a left voice goes to Labour or some such thing at this point, laughably. But instead, Green Party co-leader Carla Denyer was on the panel, and if you wanted some actual balance, she was more than up to providing it, pushing the Green Party's pro-ceasefire narrative with regard to the situation in Israel and Gaza, and taking Morgan down a peg or two while she was at it. Right, so the situation in the Middle East remains desperate as further bombing continues. Western narratives continue to support Israel, with the already in enough trouble and should keep his nose out of things Boris Johnson now having skipped off to Israel himself to press flesh with the Israeli Defence Force, presumably before they go off and bomb some more civilians, who it seems inescapably clear to those paying attention by now are either being deliberately targeted or definitely not being exempted from their actual targets. The civilian death toll in 3 weeks is 20 times that seen in Ukraine since the start of the war there with Russia. That's not the actions of a force trying to minimise civilian casualties, nor trying to actually rescue hostages, as they claim. That's the actions of a force that really doesn't seem to care. Piers Morgan has apparently been skipping between the US and the UK this week, both countries very much on the same page regarding Israel, i.e. they're on their side. And this shouldn't surprise many, since the US basically writes our foreign policy, and that we'll do whatever they do, and Starmer's position in opposition is apparently based on exactly the same thing, so nothing would change with him in charge either. When asked about his stateside findings on Laura Kuenssberg's show this morning, though, Morgan said, well, it's an unbelievable mess. It's horrific. What happened on October the 7th was horrific. I think the scale of the response from Israel, clearly on the civilian toll in particular, is horrific as well. And the question becomes, what is the proportionate response? So Israel says that their mission statement is to eradicate Hamas, and we can all understand why they would want to do that. Hamas committed an appalling act of terror on its people. They don't just have a responsibility, a duty to their people to ensure it doesn't happen again. It was only last week that an Hamas spokesman was proudly boasting that they would do it again and again and again. So Israel has to defend itself. But clearly we're looking at these scenes with Gaza, and your heart just despairs for the poor people, the poor innocent Palestinians. But how do you eradicate a terror group, 40,000 of whom are living amongst the civilian population, without massive civilian casualties? Oh, he started out so well. And of course, condemning Hamas as much as Israel for what they've done is absolutely the right position to take. But Morgan's position by the end of what he had said there is nothing that can be done to avoid civilian deaths. No mention of the sort of places Israel has been hitting and killing civilians at, you might notice. Churches, mosques, hospitals. But then Israel's excuse is that Hamas are hiding there as well, whilst also saying they're all in tunnels. So make your minds up. Making excuses for the scale of the civilian deaths, or coming close to it, as I feel Morgan has here, is quite wrong. Somebody who might well know a thing or two about civilian deaths, given his involvement in the Johnson administration's handling of the pandemic, as has been coming out in the mainstream news this week, has been incredibly well covered by them at the expense of matters in the Middle East. It was almost as if they're trying to cover it up a little bit, I feel. Hence my personal reason to not have covered the goings-on with the COVID inquiry at this point. And the fact that this inquiry will rumble on still until 2026 yet, so there's going to be so much of it still to come out. It's going to get silly. But Lord James Bethel said on this story, when it was put to him too, he had to answer a question as well, have a view. When it was put to him, the matter of the US and UK having both proscribed Hamas, what did he make of the call for humanitarian pauses that's been coming out? And he decided that Iran needs to have pressure put on them, Iran being the funders of Hamas, it is being alleged, despite the fact there is ample evidence, not least admissions previously from Benjamin Netanyahu himself, that Israel are funding Hamas in order to bring about situations where Israel gets put in a position where they can take over the Gaza Strips, I believe has always been their intent, reinforced, I feel, by previous and current commentary having come from the now Minister of Intelligence in Israel, Hila Gamliel. Kuenssberg then had to come to Carla Denyer, of course, asking her, could the UK be a broker in bringing down Hamas via Iran, springboarding off what James Bethel had said? And of course, this is how it always goes, isn't it? The narrative gets set up by those pro-establishment figures, the question put to them first, and then the token lefty, for balance, gets a question framed on what had already been said by them. But this is what Carla Denyer had to say. I think the UK historically obviously has a lot of responsibility for the situation we're finding, obviously not solely, but I do think the UK has a responsibility, and we've seen this week that 3/4 of Brits want a ceasefire, and so I don't think they're being represented well by Conservatives and Labour who are refusing to call for a ceasefire. There just isn't a military solution to this crisis. It's horrendous seeing the suffering of civilians, both Israelis and Palestinians. More violence is not going to solve this problem. So the Green Party has been calling for a ceasefire and calling on the UK government to join the growing international voices that are saying a ceasefire and a renewed effort towards a peaceful political solution. Now, neither Morgan or Bethel had been interrupted as they spoke, but of course Carla Denyer wouldn't be treated with that same respect. And in came Morgan with both feet, saying to her, "What about Hamas? That's the real question. It's all very well calling for a ceasefire, and I understand it. Of course we want to stop so many innocent people being killed in Gaza. But if you have a ceasefire, what you're really saying is we're going to leave Hamas in power, and they themselves have been oppressing their people. So I think it's much more complex than to be saying, hey, so let's stop Israel doing what it's doing. We can all share a concern about the scale of it. But a ceasefire means Hamas stays in power." Now, I thought your heart was despairing at all the civilian deaths you were seeing, Piers. Now they're a price worth paying because of Hamas? That's Israel's line. Then you didn't let it go, though. She said, "So it is very complex, you're right, but we have to get to a peaceful solution. That's what everyone wants in the end, right? And we have to look at how we're going to get there. And although the thought of negotiating with people who don't share our values and who are prepared to make terrorist acts," well, again, she got cut off by Motormouth Morgan chipping in. Victoria Derbyshire would never have let this carry on. Koonsberg is the host here, in case you'd forgotten by this point. But Morgan again came back in with, "You can't negotiate with Hamas because Hamas's stated objective is to eradicate Israel." This time Denyer wasn't going to let Morgan have it all his way, though, and she chipped back in. She cut him off. Delightful to see. But she came back with, "But if you look at what happened in apartheid South Africa, in Northern Ireland, in the end it comes down to negotiation. So the question is, how do we get there in as short a possible time with the least possible deaths?" Whoops! Common sense came in. Morgan's excuses got rumbled. Koonsberg suddenly must have had somebody blasting in her ear, screaming, "Stop her now before she says any more!" So she snaps out of her daydream of whatever she was doing while she let Morgan just carry on running her show for her and put the brakes on. And so, on to the next question. It's the closest I've seen a UK political party leader stand up and infer what Israel is doing is apartheid, by bringing up South Africa, and by also bringing up Northern Ireland, and by inference the IRA. Thus it is demonstrated that proscribed terrorist organisations can and will engage in diplomacy and peace talks to bring an end to violence, which of course is what everybody wants. Jeremy Corbyn has long been ridiculed for his unfortunate reference to his friends in Hamas, but it is because he was engaging in peace talks with them at the table, as they had to be, that he referred to them as such. It was diplomacy. Same when he was involved at the request of then Labour Northern Ireland Secretary Mo Mowlam in talks with the IRA. Stuff like that got weaponised against the guy, but he was right. And historically, when ceasefires have been called, Hamas have respected them. Israeli documentation has borne that out, even if their leaders and representatives have lied through their teeth about that since, to suit their own ends. Morgan is wrong. What's new? Koonsberg saved his backside, though, because Denyer's point was irrefutable. The Green Party were the first UK party to call for a ceasefire. Most won't know that because Green Party stuff rarely ever makes the news. But they are absolutely right in that a ceasefire should be called, and they're sticking to their guns about it, excuse the pun. It needs to stop being blocked by the US, dictating foreign policy to everyone else in the West, it seems. They wouldn't be dictating that to a Green administration, though. All the deaths happening are avoidable if we can get people around the table for talks as fast as possible, if that's what the world really wants. And I have to question some world leaders as to whether that really is what they want. A ceasefire is the very first step. Talks on neutral soil would be next. It's not going to be easy. It's complex. Morgan and Denyer both said that. Both are right. Hamas did commit a terrorist attack, yet Israel have killed so many more innocent people. Hand back those surviving hostages. That also goes for the hostages Israel have taken from the West Bank that nobody is talking about. The West Bank being hammered by settler aggression right now, as well as Israeli attacks despite Hamas not being there at all. That's a disgrace. This is a 75-year mess in the making. The Zionist movement that dominates Israeli politics needs to be held accountable to international law finally, and the way to peace begins to take shape. It worked in South Africa with BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions. Yet, of course, the Tories are trying to outlaw that when it comes to Israel. Starmer would back that move as well. Neither main party is capable of making the right calls for the UK on this, or capable of holding Israel to account for what it has been doing, of representing the interests of the majority of British people who want a ceasefire. So if this matters to you, if this is a voting red line for you, then back the Green Party. There will be a lot more reasons to do so as well as we get closer to the general election and their manifesto comes out. Though, of course, you can visit their website now and see all of their policies listed, because they only get changed when we Green members vote to change them, because policy is shaped by us. There's a path to peace here, though. Let's get back to the main point and question of this video. But for us to play our part, we need to stop voting for parties that simply won't back it. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do also have your say on this video in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation. We're protesting for peace in Israel and Palestine on Armistice Day is being decried as bad taste. But sadly only by people who don't know the meaning of the word armistice. Literally, the dictionary definition of it. But I'll help them out here in this video and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so it was only in the last couple of weeks that we saw Labour lose majority control of Oxford City Council as 8 of their councillors quit the party over Keir Starmer's ardent pro-Israel anti-ceasefire stance. Labour have managed to cling on to control there, however, as a minority administration. Then last week, as I covered in another video, a letter came from the Labour council leaders of Burnley Borough Council and Pendle Borough Council, calling on Starmer to step down as Labour leader, so that somebody else can lead the party, better able to actually lead on the issue of Israel and Palestine. But over the weekend, things have escalated further in Burnley, and Labour have now lost control completely of that council as it is hit by another slew of resignations there. With no change in his stance and none likely to come anytime soon, just how much more damage to the Labour movement is the refusal to back a ceasefire going to cause to Starmer and his allies? Right, so Burnley Borough Council. It was only last week they penned a joint letter with Pendle Borough Council calling on Keir Starmer to stand down and allow a leadership election to take place. Starmer is blatantly incapable of leading the party full stop. In my mind, I left ages ago after all, but for them, the red line was Israel and Palestine, still is, and his refusal to take a lead there, instead being content to let the Tories and Joe Biden dictate Labour's foreign policy. Labour's position, a position one Labour MP has already said will change the moment the Tories or Joe Biden do, because Starmer just keeps copying them. Well, they've had enough, it would seem, because things have escalated over the weekend, seeing 11 Burnley councillors now quit the party over this issue that is literally half of their councillors, and with it goes control of the council. With 45 seats on Burnley Borough Council, having 22 of the councillors meant Labour had a substantial majority, but with 11 of them having now quit the party and gone independent, the Labour contingent is reduced to just 11 councillors left now. The independent group on the council is now the largest group, who may be able to put together an administration with 13 councillors. The Tories, the Lib Dems and the Greens have 7 councillors each on this council, just for reference. Those resigning from Labour included the council leader and signatory to that resignation letter to Starmer, Afrasiab Anwar. They've put out a statement justifying their decision, saying, "Since the outset of the violence in Gaza and Israel, we, as a collective, have consistently used our roles as councillors to advocate on behalf of our communities to bring peace by urging the leadership to call for a release of all hostages and an immediate ceasefire. We strongly condemn the loss of any innocent life without reservation. Every life holds equal value, and indiscriminate bombing and collective punishment of innocent civilians is a clear violation of international law. We have tirelessly worked to convey this message to various levels of the Labour Party, engaging in extensive efforts such as meeting the Shadow Home Secretary, discussions with the Shadow Foreign Secretary, along with council leaders from across the country, engagement with the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, dialogues with the Scottish Labour leader, sending letters to the Prime Minister, local MPs and Keir Starmer, urging Keir Starmer for a ceasefire and written correspondence, holding discussions with influential leaders and stakeholders at local, regional and national levels, supported a letter calling for a ceasefire signed by over 300 councillors. As a last resort, we took the bold step of calling on Keir Starmer to resign if he was unable to uphold Labour Party values and call for the desperately needed ceasefire. We always felt it was our responsibility as elected members to work to effect change from within. However, despite our persistent endeavours, it has become apparent that Keir Starmer and the leadership either cannot or will not heed our concerns or acknowledge the sentiments within our communities. In his speech at Chatham House, he neglected to call for a ceasefire which would have alleviated the suffering of the innocent people in Gaza and Israel. In response to our calls for him to resign, he responded that the individual concerns of members are not his focus, further illustrating that he does not value the voice of the grassroots of the party. Regrettably, after exhausting every option, we have arrived at the conclusion that the current party stance on Palestine does not align with the values we hold dear. Consequently, we have collectively decided to resign from the Labour Party with immediate effect, feeling that our place within the party is untenable given its present position. We cannot remain in a party that is not doing enough whilst innocent people are being killed in Gaza and Israel. We will continue to represent our communities as independent councillors on our respective councils and use our voice to challenge injustices across the world. So they've engaged with several Labour figures there. Yvette Cooper, David Lammy, Anna Sarwar and Angela Rayner. They've evidently written to Starmer at least twice before demanding his resignation. They've signed a letter calling for a ceasefire along with over 300 other councillors, I think it's 339, and got a reply to their call for Starmer to stand down by him, saying the issues that matter to them are not what Starmer himself is focused on. He's laser focused, as we've heard before, on winning the next election, of course. But to do what? When he doesn't stand for anything, let alone the Labour values grassroots local government is trying to uphold. If he is this dismissive of his own local councillors, what does he think of ordinary people and what they want? Starmer has now lost 48 councillors up and down the country over his refusal to back a ceasefire, over his obsession with a humanitarian pause where waiting for Palestinians to get their breath back before bombing them again is his preferred course of action. The ridiculous suspension of Andy MacDonald will not have helped matters either, and will only have hardened the resolve of some that trying to make Starmer shift his stance is like beating their heads against a brick wall. He won't move. He won't change. It's not the Labour Party anymore. It's Starmer's private fiefdom. My party, he always calls it. More and more people now saying, you're welcome to it. No, by the way, hell will freeze over before you get my vote back too. The only thing he's going to listen to is his party polling sliding over this issue, but that is staying stubbornly high. I don't believe he's in as good a place as he thinks. I don't think polling is taking into account quite the level of grassroots disgust and the lack of support Labour will have campaigning going into the next election. Of course, the media are playing this down. Naturally, Starmer is establishment, and they've got to come out to bat for him. This morning on Radio 4's Today programme, so we're on to the BBC again, it was put to Council Leader Afrasiab Anwar that your group is entirely Muslim, isn't it? The councillors and the two community activists, all of you, who have written this letter together. Oh, so according to the BBC, this is just a Muslim problem, is it? Really? Well, we'll see about that. Councillor Anwar responded, however, by saying, this is not a Muslim issue. There are people who are passionate about this issue. It's an emotive issue. It is not a Muslim issue. There's a danger here. This is one of the problems that we have. SUella Braverman does this, trying to turn it into a culture war, about turning communities on one another. This is a humanitarian issue. Just some casual Islamophobia from the BBC there, it would seem. Oh, this council group are all Muslims. That must be why they've all quit. They're only worried about the Palestinians because they're all Muslims. Blatantly not true, as their letters and their calls for a ceasefire are for the benefit of Palestinians and Israelis alike. But there's a narrative to set there, and this lot don't fit it. How to discredit them? Well, the fact is, of those 48 councillors who have quit, more than a dozen of them are not Muslim. And of the 300 and so on councillors who have signed that letter to Starmer calling for a ceasefire, more than 2/3 of them are not Muslim. Starmer doesn't care about what Labour members or even Labour elected officials want on this matter, because all that matters to him is getting into number 10 and him peddling the establishment's chosen line to help him get there. This morning on GMB, just to reinforce this point some more, Michael Portillo was on, the train-bothering former Tory MP and a former Defence Secretary, who said Keir Starmer has done exactly the right thing in opposing a ceasefire in Gaza. And this is important because the US would want to know whether or not a future Labour government would deviate from their alliance. From the horse's mouth, or from the Tories' mouth. And again, supporting what I've said in other videos in recent days, that the US and the Tories are in agreement and are dictating foreign policy here to Labour, not just to the Tories in government, but also to Labour in opposition. And equally, it is true what that Labour MP I mentioned at the start of this video said, that it won't be until Joe Biden shifts, Genocide Joe as he's being called in America at the moment, that Starmer will move on his stance on this. Tells you all you need to know about who is in charge And with Starmer taking his orders from elsewhere constantly, there's little Labour members can do to change things when he won't listen to them, except quit. Labour is the biggest obstacle for change in this country because people still believe voting for them will bring change. All the evidence is there that it will not. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this video in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Green Party co-leader Carla Denyer rinsing Piers Morgan over this very issue on Laura Kuenssberg's establishment-friendly Sunday morning politics show shows they're the party to back if you want a ceasefire. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so for as much as Keir Starmer is giving the impression right now that he doesn't care what Labour councillors say on the matter of a ceasefire, doesn't care what members have to say, doesn't care how many of them quit the party right now because of his refusal to take a stand against more civilian deaths, which is what refusing to back a ceasefire ultimately amounts to. Behind the scenes, Labour might be panicking a little bit. And the reason I think they might be panicking a little bit is because an email has apparently been sent out to councillors, Labour councillors, by We Believe in Israel, the pro-Israel advocacy company, a branch of BICOM, the British Israel Communications and Research Centre, who are basically Israel lobbyists funded by the Israeli state. We Believe in Israel's director is a certain Luke Akehurst, a rabid right-winger who has publicly scoffed at some of the councillors who have quit the party on his home turf of Oxford City Council over Starmer's ceasefire stance, and who happens to also sit on Labour's National Executive Committee as one of the staunch Starmer supporting lot. Well, this email, allegedly sent out from We Believe in Israel to Labour councillors, apparently from Akehurst himself, pretty much telling them not to criticise Israel as is entirely justifiable to do right now. But the question I want to know is, having had this email passed on to me, did every Labour councillor get sent this? Since if that is the case, since when did being a Labour member, or elected official even, automatically put you on We Believe in Israel's mailing list? Has Akehurst broken GDPR rules over this? Right, so pro-Israel cheerleader, though I really don't want to picture him in a short skirt and pom-poms, Luke Akehurst of the Labour Party NEC, but in his role as director of We Believe in Israel, has apparently sent out an email that has been passed on to me, which seems to be an attempt to reach out to councillors the country over, assuming it has been sent to them all. I don't know that. It may only be ones on the We Believe in Israel mailing list, but to be on their mailing list, you'd have to be of a pro-Israel persuasion already. And the content of the email implies to my mind an attempt to reach out beyond that. This to me looks like an attempt, albeit a weak one, to try and do some damage limitation as more and more councillors seemingly on a weekly basis quit the Labour Party to become independents, disgusted at Keir Starmer's refusal to back a ceasefire. This is what it says. See what you make of it. Dear Councillor, the war between Israel and Hamas. I'm writing as director of We Believe in Israel. We have a long-standing network of councillors, local government friends of Israel, launched at LGA Conference 2015, which serves to combat attempts to boycott and delegitimise Israel in local authorities, educate and inform councillors about Israel, build links between British and Israeli authorities, advocate for a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestine conflict. Right now, I know you will be horrified both by the massacre of 1,400 Israelis perpetrated by Hamas on the 7th of October and the associated atrocities and kidnappings, and by the deaths and suffering in Gaza that have happened as a result of the subsequent war. Our main ask of you, wherever your sympathies instinctively lie in this complex conflict, is not to do anything as a councillor or collectively as a council that exacerbates tensions between communities in your area or imports the conflict into your town hall. Please consider marking your concerns about the war in a way that brings communities together, such as a multi-faith vigil for peace. Please do not lose sight of the fact that the 7th of October was the largest death toll of Jewish people since the Holocaust and the worst terrorist attack since 9/11. Many Jewish people in the UK have lost friends and family in Israel or are terrified about what might happen to them, and all of the community is traumatised by the horror of what has happened. If you wish to condemn specific military actions by Israel, please use language that is not inflammatory, avoids anti-Semitic stereotypes or tropes, does not delegitimise Israel's existence, and does not seek to blame diaspora Jewish communities. If you wish to express solidarity with suffering Palestinians, please do this in a way that is pro-Palestinian, pro-peace, and not anti-Israel. If you want more on the background to the conflict to deepen your understanding, we would recommend this briefing from BICOM. Please let me know if you have any questions about anything relating to Israel. If you need advice about how to respond to motions about the conflict, boycott proposals, or any other anti-Israel activity affecting your local authority, please do not hesitate to contact me. Best wishes, Luke Akers, Director, We Believe in Israel. Brass neck of him! He's not done this in his capacity of a member of the Labour Party NEC. He's quite clear about that. Yet he's contacting Labour councillors, apparently, if this is legitimate. And when he begins his email by introducing We Believe in Israel, it implies that this has not gone to people already on their mailing list. So has Akers used Labour mailing lists for his own business interests, as well as to push, still, even now, a pro-Israel narrative? Express solidarity with Palestinians, but only as long as you do it in an Israel-friendly way. Bit difficult when it is Israel blowing them to bits, though, eh? 1,400 dead Israelis, largest death toll of Jewish people since the Holocaust, biggest terrorist event since 9/11. That is a legitimate tragedy. But when he refers to those deaths as a massacre, and what is happening in Gaza is simply deaths and suffering, when the death toll in Gaza has now topped 10,000, is nearly 10 times higher than the Israeli death toll. That 9/11 claim, a little bit stretched at this point, given how Israel is behaving, in my opinion. It's not exactly even-handed in its description, is it? They're mainly Muslims, though. If you have to be critical of the Israeli military, be very careful not to be anti-Semitic about it, because that's never been weaponized at all, ever, has it? The whole thing is, despite the resignations we've seen, an attempt to still protect Israel from criticism by more councillors who are increasingly going public with their disgust at their party's response to what is happening in Israel and Gaza. Instead of trying to placate and open a dialogue with elected Labour figures, Akers seemingly has decided that telling them what to do is what they need, and if in doubt, here's some propaganda from BICOM to take a look at. It is adding insult to injury, and what right does he have to do this? Who does he think he is? If I'd been sent this, I'd put it through the shredder and print another copy off just so I could do it again. How dare Akers tell people how they should be angry in this situation, and who they ought to be angry at, and in what way they should be angry, and how they should direct that. He's ardently pro-Israel. He's paid to be. He's not impartial. And I don't see how this is going to calm down tensions amongst Labour figures, since if it got my backup reading it, it will have done likewise to others. Are you an elected Labour official? Did you get a copy of this email? And if so, have you got a connection to We Believe in Israel that would warrant you having it? I'd like to know. I'd like to know if people have been sent this despite having nothing to do with Akers' outfit, implying he's using data that he's probably got no right to be. And has he done this with the OK from Labour itself to use their data? Because that would be worse. He's certainly in a position, I think, where that could be the case, being on the NEC. That would mean they're permitting your data to be used by him to push his pro-Israeli agenda on councillors, increasingly fed up with their party not backing a ceasefire. That's insane, if that's the truth of it, and casts an even darker shadow over Labour's ongoing response to this genocide we're all observing. There's questions here that need answering. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Akers himself attacking Jews isn't a new phenomenon, as he recently laid into prominent Jewish activist Jackie Walker. Oh, she must be the wrong sort then. And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Keir Starmer very much has a pro-Israel agenda. Zionist without qualification and all that, as we know he is. But he's coming for significant condemnation of it in light of Israeli attacks on Gaza. 48 councillors at last count have resigned from the party over his refusal to back a ceasefire. Further fallout is on the way over that by the sound of things, with rebel Labour MPs possibly joining with the SNP to bring a motion to Parliament to demand a ceasefire and force a vote on it, completely undermining both main party leaders, entirely justifiably in my opinion. But now yesterday I covered an underreported story concerning Labour NEC member and director of We Believe in Israel, Luke Akers, who in his capacity as that director allegedly sent emails to Labour councillors nationwide, urging them to remember what has happened to Israel, the deaths occurring in Israel, and if people had to be pro-Palestinian about it, to do so in a manner that did not come across as anti-Israel. Akers is paid to advocate for Israel, of course. It's his day job. He isn't impartial on this. Yet there seems to be a blurring of the lines insofar as his employed conduct
versus his elected position are concerned. However, whilst that video was being made yesterday, Akehurst himself was engaged in yet more pro-Israel advocacy, indicating a not insignificant level of pushing Israel's interests in the Labour Party going on behind the scenes. Right, so yesterday I covered Akehurst apparently sending out these emails to Labour councillors, and the question I raised in that video was how had he obtained that data in order to do that? I've had responses from numerous people to say they've had that email, that they've questioned it too. They've questioned what right Akehurst had to do this, and I won't go into the exact responses they got in case that ends up exposing certain individuals to Labour's governance and legal unit. Let's just say nobody I've spoken to on it was particularly happy with the reply they got. But whilst all of this was going on, whilst I was making that video, Akehurst was in London, attending the London Councillors Seminar 2023, which sounds somewhat innocuous, but when you realise it was organised jointly by the Board of Deputies of British Jews, the London Jewish Forum, and the Jewish Leadership Council, there's a very pro-Zionist flavour to it. This is what the seminar was concerned with, of course: Zionism, Israel, how councillors should conduct themselves in a way that those sponsoring the event would like. The Board of Deputies are well known now as a pro-Israel, largely conservative group that purports to represent all British Jewry, though an awful lot of Jews will dispute that. The Jewish Leadership Council counts amongst its chairpersons a certain Trevor Chin, a prominent Blairite pro-Israel donor, the man who funded Keir Starmer's Labour leadership campaign, and therefore somebody Starmer owes a lot to. And if you remember how cagey Starmer was at the time that he was running for leader about naming his donors, this is one large reason as to why that might have been. And the London Jewish Forum, according to its own Twitter page, is a joint venture between the Board of Deputies and the Jewish Leadership Council. So nice to know that they're quite chummy with each other, isn't it? Well, Akehurst was there as a speaker, features in the handbook that was given out, speaking on the topic of Israel and its effects on British Jews. Apparently the only non-Jewish speaker there, incidentally. And a point I didn't raise in video yesterday, which is quite relevant to all of this, is that Akehurst being on the NEC and advocating for Israel as he does, you have to remember this is a guy who is in a position to oversee disciplinary cases on these matters. So how can he possibly do so impartially? Anyway, back to the seminar. And the reason I can speak about this is thanks to people who were in attendance, extremely worried about what they heard there, and reached out to me about that. So thank you to those who've done that. And obviously I won't be naming anybody who has done so. Everyone with experience of Labour discipline these days doesn't need to be reminded as to why that is. Here's a selection, though, of some of the things that were apparently said there that I've been told that caused significant consternation for some. Several of the event speakers apparently said that 100,000 hostile speakers are marching for Hamas and jihad. Well, who could they possibly mean? Peaceful protesters marching in London for a ceasefire? The old "you're backing Hamas" trope by standing up for Palestinians? For an event that would have spent so much time, indeed having a talk specifically on anti-Semitism, that kind of comment, repeated more than once, seemed awfully Islamophobic to me. On top of that, another comment made that was decidedly worrying was a speaker saying, "No UK Jew wants a ceasefire, the war must carry on." An awful lot of Jews have been marching up and down the country for weeks saying otherwise, saying the complete opposite, showing humanity, I would argue, though perhaps they're all the wrong kind. That really upsets some people who were there, especially those with family, friends stuck in Gaza right now, sending a message out from this seminar that Palestinian interests are very much secondary, but with the narrative and the agenda being so very, very one-sided given what is happening in Israel and Gaza right now, nobody felt they could speak out. As far as Akehurst himself went, he apparently apologised for that "We Believe in Israel" email being sent out, but only because it was sent out late. There's been a question, I certainly floated it in my video on this yesterday, as to how Akehurst came by all the contact details for Labour councillors to send his email out to, given this was done not in his capacity as an NEC member, but in his capacity of director of We Believe in Israel. Akehurst, interestingly, apparently said it was sent out late because the data was arriving in batches. So somebody was sending him the contact details then. Now I posited, was a GDPR breach happening here because Akehurst is on the Labour Party NEC? Does that put him in a position to harvest the data himself? But he didn't infer that here, and indeed it's become apparent that it's not just Labour councillors that he sent his email out to, but he was being sent it from somewhere. Now it's been pointed out to me since yesterday that of course elected councillors the country over have their contact details made publicly available so that constituents can get in touch with them. but there are thousands and thousands of councillors up and down this country. If the data was arriving in batches, was somebody literally collating it all, or could it only be sent over one bit at a time from someone or some organisation who might have done that already? Who had a vested interest in collecting this data? Well, we could be looking at various think tanks who might have done that. We could even be looking at BICOM itself, British Israel Communications and Research Centre, emphasis on the communications bit. Acre's We Believe in Israel vehicle is an offshoot of BICOM, so could it be them? When various speakers spoke of, for example, going into schools and doing talks, they made mention of the fact they rely on materials supplied by BICOM for them to do that, so there's food for thought there. Whoever it is, somebody has collated all these contact details for councillors up and down the country and has been sending it in batches to Akehurst in order to be able to send his email out to councillors, not just Labour ones, but of all parties apparently, which does seem crazy actually when you consider that he's an elected official of the Labour Party, in how he basically wants them to conduct themselves regarding the ongoing Israel and Gaza conflict. The subject of boycott, divestment and sanctions came up in Acre's speech. I say speech, he was holding court in a breakage room apparently for his bit, and says nobody should back BDS on the basis it inconveniences Jews who need kosher food, as opposed to Palestinians who just need food full stop then, eh? Priorities. I don't share his. As far as motions or events that might be critical of Israel, Akehurst was quite vociferous in encouraging councillors to check with him first and to just call me. But actually he wasn't saying anything particularly new, I'm told, because guidance had already been issued to Labour councillors, certainly, saying everything they were being told at this seminar, which to them made it feel that the chilling of activity and free speech on Palestine and in favour of Palestinians was being dictated to them via the Labour Party organisation from the bodies who sponsored this event. That, for some, has been the takeaway from this. Labour policy on Israel, aside from the leadership's pro-Israel bias, is being crafted by the likes of Trevor Chin, by the Board of Deputies. It's not being done by elected Labour officials, and if those that feel that way are right, then not only is that driving Labour in an ever more Islamophobic direction as it acquiesces increasingly towards the Israel lobby, but is completely anti-democratic with it if Labour are basically outsourcing to pro-Israel bodies their position regarding Israel and Palestine. What seems clear from the details I've had passed on to me is that the Labour Party position on what is happening in Israel and Gaza is going far beyond just Starmer. I can completely believe that he isn't in the driving seat on this. When is he in the driver's seat on anything? But as Labour leader, he should be. Needless to say, one more message that came out of this seminar is that overall they are happy with the messaging coming out from both Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer on this issue, because they are backing them, taking a side and not backing a ceasefire to bring about peace. Councillors of all parties are elected to represent their constituents, and certainly those in London have some of the most multicultural and ethno-religiously diverse wards in the country, making it all the more important that no one ethnic or religious background should be prioritised over another. Yet that seems to be very much what Akehurst and those speaking along with him at this seminar have been instructing councillors to do, and that is intensely disturbing. To add one more thing, one more important point, is something those who have got in touch with me wanted to make clear. As residents asked them not to be silent on Gaza, they asked that I reassure those residents that although they have requested confidentiality from me in making this video, they will not be cowed into silence by the likes of Akehurst in their duties as councillors, and that their duty is to their constituents first and foremost, and will remain so. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where I covered the email mentioned in this video that Akehurst sent out, the details of that which relate to this video here. So go and take a look at that one if you've not seen it already. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so you'd probably have to have been living under a rock at this point to not be aware of the bonfire SUella Braverman is trying to light under the planned protest marches across the country that will be happening on Armistice Day this coming Saturday. The disinformation, the hate speech, the fear-mongering that she, as Home Secretary, no less, is stoking up, and which our spineless jellyfish of a Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, will not condemn. Her comments will, I think, amongst right-thinking, compassionate, empathetic people, horrified by what they are witnessing happening in Gaza, encourage even greater turnout amongst them than we've seen so far. And crowds in London have been amongst the biggest seen in decades in the capital. The most surefire way to get the collective British back up to tell them not to do something for an unacceptable reason. My fear is, though, that as a result of greater numbers and the high profile of this march and the day it is marking, attacks on protesters by the far right that Braverman is encouraging have become all the more likely now. Right, so I did a video the other day going over the meaning of armistice, a word that basically means a ceasefire, arms stoppage being the literal translation from the Latin. For this coming weekend, on both Armistice Day on Saturday and Remembrance Sunday on, of course, Sunday, we'll still see people sporting poppies, a symbol of not only remembrance but also peace, still refusing to call for a ceasefire in Israel and Gaza. Oh, by the way, do you happen to know what the national flower of Palestine is? Yeah, the poppy. So we're going to see an awful lot of hypocrites this weekend wearing them, aren't we? But SUella Braverman, she's been driving some hateful rhetoric. Not that that is anything new. She's less of a Home Secretary and more the Minister for starting culture wars. Still referring to this weekend's planned events as a hate march. She's not a peace activist. She doesn't believe in putting fires out and promoting peace. She's lighting the damn fires. She's a bloody arsonist. She's been particularly foul regarding the protest going near to and desecrating the Cenotaph, the national monument to all of those who fought and died for the freedoms we all enjoy, notwithstanding the fact Braverman would no doubt strip us of all of those freedoms in a heartbeat if we gave her half a chance to do so. Over and over again, she's referred to those pro-Palestine demonstrations as hate marches, and as we all know, if you repeat something often enough, people, some at least, will believe it. Others will just take it as an opportunity to act on their own racist natures. Braverman kept saying this even after the Met Police themselves briefed her that the demonstration on Saturday, which has been planned for weeks, all the necessary liaising with the police that is always done ahead of these large events has taken place. It is still legal to protest, though. Braverman might wish it otherwise. But after the Met Police had told Braverman, though, that the demonstration on Saturday was going nowhere near Whitehall, let alone the Cenotaph, because it's going from Marble Arch to the US Embassy. Any desecration of the Cenotaph would be abhorrent and condemnable, and we'd all join in that condemnation of that, but it won't be legitimate Palestine protesters doing it. Nevertheless, Braverman's hate speech, the media who keep platforming it, have all led to a situation now where the risk of violence has grown to the point the Met Police are now asking people to postpone their march. They won't. It's too long in the planning. You, the police, are supposed to be there to ensure it is safe and conducted without incidents of violence, so you could always try telling your boss to shut her hole, perhaps. You know from past marches the number of criminal behaviours has been minimal, so who is it you really need to be looking out for? Because it isn't the demonstrators themselves on the whole, but those wishing to have a clash with them. They will have been emboldened by the person literally in charge of you, so why are you taking orders from such an irresponsible Home Secretary? She has called it a hate march over and over again. She has created this idea in the minds of the patriots, those who prove the word really is the last refuge of the scoundrel, though, as something that it is their job to oppose. And they will. And too often we see that done as a show of violence. We've seen peaceful protests for weeks. If this one doesn't go the same way, then Braverman will have driven that. She will have helped to stoke the flames, the arsonist that she is. She will have emboldened those with violent intent that this must be resisted. If the protesters seek to defend themselves from attack or retaliate, then they will be seen, and no doubt the right-wing hate rags will carry this narrative too, that Braverman was right all along. And we can't have that, because she's not right. And of course we have to remember that Braverman had no problem with marches for Ukraine. And the only difference between Ukraine and Gaza right now is geography, is where in the world they are, and the religion and the skin colour of the people who live there. And people will say, well, Braverman can't be racist because she's brown-skinned, and if anything I'd say that's a get-out-of-jail-free card she doesn't deserve to be credited with. A former race advisor to Boris Johnson called Samuel Kasumu, a black-skinned man, by just for reference, has said of Braverman that she has big problems with Muslims. She is Islamophobic, and she shouldn't be Home Secretary. Her views on what is a good and decent march by good and decent people, and what isn't, amounts to who they are protesting for. And I'd like to think those who are well informed enough will have protested for both, because if you backed Ukraine and not Gaza equally, well, you've got issues, and you need to have a look at yourself and have a little bit of time for self-reflection and work on that. But so much will also have come from people just not being well informed. And for that, it's our media who are at fault for not adequately doing so and not framing both cases in the same light. Ultimately, though, despite Braverman, despite the risks she is causing to increase, despite the Met Police's warnings, the march on Saturday will go ahead. We Will March, very much trending on social media today as people announce they will be joining the march in spite of Braverman, because ultimately we have to remember why we're protesting in the first place and not make this all about her and her vileness. Stop the War are joining the march, Palestine Solidarity Campaign, the Peace and Justice Project, and the latest additions to publicly announce their intention to join the march at time of writing are the Trade Union General Secretaries of the Fire Brigade Union Matt Rack, the RMT's Mick Lynch, and the NEU's Daniel Kebede, calling for a ceasefire, as all three are, with Mick Lynch speaking at the event as well. Israel has bombed hospitals, mosques, churches, ambulances, civilian buildings, border crossing, convoys of civilians, so that more than 10,000 people in Gaza are dead. How many of them were Hamas? They won't tell us, because then that would expose the number of civilian casualties they've decided are acceptable. Among the dead, of course, though, are thousands of children. 40% of the population of Gaza under the age of 14. Journalists reporting on what is happening have been killed. UN employees have been killed, as have countless medical staff. Israel have blocked humanitarian aid. They cut off power and water and food and medicines, and we're supposed to pretend that everyone choosing to march this weekend on Armistice Day, the most appropriate day for a ceasefire march in our calendar, is somebody marching with hate in their hearts. The only person consumed with hate over this is Suella Braverman. She is so dangerous, so right-wing in her beliefs. She has absolutely no business being in a position of power or responsibility in this country. And as well as marching for a ceasefire, for peace, for Palestine this weekend, marching to give her a two-fingered salute seems entirely appropriate as well. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Do also have your say on this video in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Jeremy Corbyn recently went after Braverman for a vile rhetoric as well, not pulling any punches on his part either. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so finally, after weeks of seeing resignations up and down the country from the Labour Party, as members and councillors alike quit in disgust at Keir Starmer's refusal to call for a ceasefire, to stand behind Israel's right to defend itself, regardless of the atrocities that state itself is committing in Gaza, the Zionist without qualification that he is, has finally been hit by his first front bench resignation, at last. A significant number of his front benchers have defied the party line over Starmer's ceasefire stance up until now, and uncustomarily for Starmer, he hasn't come down on them like a ton of bricks over it. But then, they're all of his own faction these days mainly, showing not just the unpopularity of his position, but his own weakness and vulnerability in the face of criticism from party allies he can't afford to lose. But losing them, he now might well be. Having relied on them wanting to keep their cushy jobs in spite of disagreeing with him on his position regarding Israel and Gaza, the resignation of Imran Hussein, one of the first of the front bench to speak out in favour of a ceasefire previously, arguably setting the tone that others have followed, could Starmer now face further resignations as he continues to act in defiance of the will of the British people on this, not interested in what we want, not being his focus as he's on record as also saying now, not wanting to represent us but rule us is the inference. Well, cracks are finally showing. But he's coming down like a ton of bricks now. He's threatening sackings as people resign instead, as Imran Hussein has resigned instead. So will they force him to change his stance, all these people that previously signed this early day motion in favour of a ceasefire? Or will he ultimately be brought down in the end as leader of a party increasingly standing against it? Right, so finally, many of us have been asking for weeks, will a resignation ever bloody come? Will any of the Labour front bench put their money where their mouths are? Because it was all well and good them coming out and calling for a ceasefire, in itself not insignificant given what a dictator Starmer is internally behind closed doors and how hard he has been known to crack down on those daring to dissent, though it was felt that having had 18 frontbenchers sign an early day motion put down by backbench lefty Labour MP Richard Bergen, that he would be in significant strife if he started sacking over a dozen people for doing this, for taking a stand to literally end the killing going on in Israel and Gaza, rather than just pause for lunch, as it were, before resuming their bombing, as remains his preferred option, at least until Joe Biden and Rishi Sunak inevitably call for a ceasefire at some point. After all, it is the only way the situation will ever be calmed down. Though I'd argue, with the Pandora's box of the reality behind Israel's motivations and their occupation, the eventual ceasefire should be used as an opportunity to finally get that two-state solution resolved and in place properly and meaningfully because 75 years of dispute is more than long enough. But of course, for Starmer, this is the rub. If he started sacking people over signing that EDM when he inevitably flips-flops into line with the US and the Tories, as he always does, and inevitably will have to as well, he will have sacked people who would have been proven right. However, things have changed thanks to the King's speech. Being the state opening of Parliament as it is, all EDMs and legislation sat on the statute book will have been cancelled out. And as such, Richard Bergen has put his early day motion for a ceasefire back down again. And as such, MPs, including those front benchers who signed it before, would now need to sign it again. Starmer has apparently already opted to head this off, though. Despite what I said a moment ago about sacking people who will inevitably, at some point in the future, be proven right by the need for a ceasefire, the front bench have now been warned they will face the sack this time if they sign that EDM again. Such is the level of determination in Starmer to not back a ceasefire, no matter how many calls for it come his way. He is disgusting. But it is this act that has forced the first resignation from the front bench in the form of Imran Hussain, the now former Shadow Secretary of State for the New Deal for Working People and MP for Bradford East. Having been told he would face the sack this morning if he signed Bergen's EDM calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, he chose to resign late last night instead, so he could sign it. That's one of those 18 now, and knowing who the other 17 are, who felt a ceasefire was needed previously, it'll be interesting to see how many, if any, do indeed end up joining Hussain in quitting Team Keith, or who don't sign it this time, clearly putting their own career prospects before the lives of innocent Palestinians they gave the impression they gave a damn about before. In a tweet put out at 11:17 p.m. last night, Hussain said, "I want to be able to strongly advocate for a ceasefire, as called for by the UN General Secretary. In order to be fully free to do so, I have tonight stepped down from Labour's front bench." To which end, he also attached his resignation letter, which, after the usual polite thanks for the opportunity spiel that resignation letters often carry, he laid it out for Starmer, and although he kept everything polite, he did say everything he clearly felt he needed to. He said, "Over recent weeks it has become clear that my view on the ongoing humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza differs from the position you have adopted. As I write, more than 1,400 Israeli and 10,000 Palestinian civilians have been killed in the last month. This shocking number of fatalities is set to grow as indiscriminate attacks and the siege of Gaza continues. Yesterday, the United Nations Secretary General warned that Gaza is becoming a graveyard for children and stated that a humanitarian ceasefire becomes more urgent with every passing hour. Given the crisis unfolding, I wish to be a strong advocate for the humanitarian ceasefire advocated by the UN General Secretary, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and other UN humanitarian bodies, by numerous governments, and by leading humanitarian organisations like Oxfam, Save the Children, and Amnesty International. It is clear that I cannot sufficiently in all good conscience do this from the front bench given its current position. A ceasefire is essential to end the bloodshed, to ensure that enough aid can pass into Gaza and reach those most in need, and to help ensure the safe return of the Israeli hostages. As I made clear to the Foreign Secretary on Tuesday the 24th of October 2023, the situation in Gaza is now beyond that of a humanitarian catastrophe. The cutting of food, water, power and medicine to Palestinians in Gaza is an act of collective punishment that violates international law and is a clear war crime under the Geneva Conventions. Like many others, I was therefore deeply troubled by the comments you made during an LBC interview on the 11th of October 2023, where you appeared to endorse such actions by the Israeli military. Whilst I appreciate your subsequent statements to clarify your comments and the increased emphasis being placed on addressing the desperate situation in Gaza, and whilst we both want an end to the bloodshed, I believe the party needs to go further and call for a ceasefire. I have unequivocally condemned Hamas's attacks of the 7th of October, and I firmly agree that every country has a right to defend itself. This, however, can never become a right to deliberately violate international law on protecting civilians or to commit war crimes. It has always been my view, which I have made clear repeatedly in Parliament, that human rights are universal and that it is our duty to call out all those who violate international law and commit war crimes. I will therefore continue to press from the backbenches for a humanitarian ceasefire to protect civilians in line with the demands of the UN Secretary General, and beyond that for the realisation of a lasting resolution that will deliver peace for Israelis and Palestinians as part of a two-state solution. A graveyard of children he made reference to there. And if you're on the Labour front bench, it's a sacking offence now to sign an EDM standing against that. To stay on the Labour front bench is to have that on your conscience right now. That there hasn't been a stream of resignations since Starmer handed this diktat down shows an awful lack of conscience, from my perspective, excusing himself, Starmer by the way, by saying a ceasefire will only help Hamas. Bullshit! It helps all concerned, notably children, to keep breathing, to have a life still in their breasts. All conflicts end when people start talking, and that always begins with a ceasefire. Those not calling for one have an ulterior motive. And when that motive means turning a blind eye to 10,000 civilian deaths in Palestine, and I'm not ignoring or belittling the Israeli deaths when I say that, but when half of those 10,000 deaths in Palestine are of children, when human rights organisations are calling this out, and when Labour is reportedly led by a former human rights lawyer after all, and he's sacking people, or prepared to if they stand for human rights, and the rights of those kids to stay alive at that, how anyone can frankly look at Keir Starmer in a favourable light and consider voting for a party led by him right now, God only knows. A vote for him right now is a vote to turn a blind eye to that, to support even more deaths as a lack of a ceasefire inevitably results in. I know I couldn't live with that on my conscience. Can you, Labour voters? But hey, he's bound to change his tune eventually, right? What a pity it won't be Labour members and representatives that convince him to do that, though. It'll be the Tory party leader who inevitably does. Solidarity to Imran Hussain. Principles stand, and principles are a rare commodity in the Labour Party these days. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Starmer might be threatening to sack his front benchers for not wanting any more innocents to die, but plenty of members want him gone. Not that he ever listened to them, of course. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so for as many Labour MPs have spoken out over Starmer's nonsense ceasefire stance, which will see further deaths in Israel and Gaza, completely avoidable, of course, with a ceasefire, and for as much ire as he has caused within his own party regionally and locally amongst councillors as well, he can always rely on his favourite minion, the ultra-loyal Wes Streeting, to support him, whatever he does. But that loyalty to the brill-creamed one comes at a price these days, with Starmer's position, identical to the Tories as it is, being completely out of kilter with 76% of the general public, the voters, whose votes Labour expects, yet does absolutely nothing to actually appeal to them, voters taken for granted, who actually want a ceasefire. But if there's any demographic out there that won't stand for politicians' nonsense, and will call it out when they see it these days, it's definitely the younger voters and potential future voters, who arguably have never been more politicised by the way the Tories have run the country into the ground, but equally by a Labour opposition, a government in waiting as they like to think of themselves, who aren't offering anything different either. And the kids gave Wesley a message he ought to take heed of. But that was just the start of what amounted to be several very bad days for the red Tory boy. Right, so Wes Streeting, the shiny, sparrow-faced Shadow Health Secretary, and widely seen as the most loyal of Starmer loyalists. Well, he's had a horrible few days. I'm sure he'll be broken-hearted to hear. It all began last Friday. It should have been one of those nice constituency jobs, the MP visiting a local school. But it didn't go down that way at all. You see, kids aren't stupid. They're aware in a way they never have been as a generation before these days, never having really been ones to buy a newspaper, nor really ones to sit and watch the TV news, or go out of their way to do so. But being the generation that has grown up with the internet, with social media, they absorb what is happening in the world via that medium. And it's made them politically aware as a consequence. And when Streeting was going to talk at an assembly of some 17 or 18-year-olds, first-time voters, or those about to be, their response to him showed just how well informed they actually are. Streeting was due to address students at Beale High School in Ilford, around 300 of them, quite a large assembly, but rather than get attentive students hanging on the words of a potential future minister, he got boycotted by many who refused to attend the assembly, or who walked out of the assembly when he turned up. He was due to speak, as I said, to around 300 students in the senior year. Instead, just 20 of them agreed to go. The school ended up having to send in younger year groups to fill the void. I'm sure they were fascinated. One student went on record as saying, "We heard Wes Streeting would be coming down to do a talk on university and personal statements. But as a year group, we wanted to show our support to those in Palestine. Keir Starmer stated he does not support calls for a ceasefire. None of us agreed with this, so collectively, we showed our position by not attending." Collectivism in action. It's a beautiful thing. Now, Streeting electorally could be in a bit of bother by ardently backing Starmer's no ceasefire position, since the school and indeed his constituency has a not inconsiderable Muslim population. And of course, it isn't just Muslims utterly disgusted by the Labour Party stance, but all those standing in solidarity with them, notably, but not exclusively, of course, the Palestinian ones, against a Zionist narrative that has always been pushed by politicians in hoc with the Israeli state and those who push that foul political doctrine, which has led to so much fallout, so much violence and occupation, everything we've seen since the Nakba 75 years ago, that treats Palestinians as somehow less than human and has warped whatever the state of Israel was intended to be into an apartheid regime that should be sanctioned and condemned for its treatment of a people, especially in Gaza, who are locked up in what amounts to a concentration camp. As one of the kids' parents put it, Israel's genocide of Gaza playing out before our eyes in real time, uncensored as social media shows. What the mainstream media would never show is politicising young people like nothing has before. The raw, unfiltered, shocking images that we in the West have always been insulated from over the years are now being revealed in stark terms. And it is shocking, it is upsetting, it is angering. And that anger is being directed at politicians who are being seen to be overtly backing this carrying on. Things got worse for Streeting on his home turf this week, though. On Tuesday, a couple of days ago, some 400 of his constituents, and they were far from just being Muslims and just being young people, but all were very much pro-Palestine activists, turned up to protest against the party position to demand that he, as one of Labour's staunchest pro-Israeli MPs, and of course an ardent Starmeroid, that he step aside. They want Streeting gone. These are activists, Wes. These aren't just lost votes. These will be people out campaigning against you because of the position you've taken on this. Going full, I'm with Starmer, means you've painted a target on your back that is seeing people now wanting you gone. Wes is, of course, amongst the Labour Friends of Israel group and naturally has benefited from donations in line with that, bought and paid for. A name that has cropped up in a number of my videos of late when I've spoken about donations and being pro-Israeli as a result is Trevor Chin. The Blairite donor who funded Starmer's leadership campaign is a chair on the Jewish Leadership Council. Wherever pro-Israel narratives are, he seems to be not too far away. And indeed that's the case with Weasley too, with Chin having paid for the office costs of the very office that these people were protesting outside of. So that's all the more reason to protest there, in my mind. Was Wesley there? Not on a Tuesday. But of course that doesn't matter. The sea of Palestinian flags on show was spread far and wide on social media. News that people are standing up for Palestine, as they've been demonstrating over for weeks now, and it's not going away, all ahead of this week's Armistice Day March on the weekend. And then, of course, because these things always come in threes, don't they, he cropped up on Newsnight last night, faced with Victoria Derbyshire, and he had a well-deserved nightmare of an interview with her. When asked whether Israel was operating within international law with regards to its actions in Gaza, Streeting said, I'm deeply disturbed by the number of civilian casualties, particularly the number of children and the stark warning from the United Nations we've seen today. I acknowledge that for Israel this is fiendishly difficult because you've got Hamas that embeds itself in civilian populations, uses buildings like schools and hospitals as bunkers to hide within. That's really difficult. You aren't answering the question, Wesley, and Victoria Derbyshire didn't like that, so she stopped him and asked again, is it within international law? Back on track, Wesley, spit it out, say the words. Well, he came back with, the Labour Party would urge Israel to remain within international law. Oh, get a little bit flustered there. That's not quite saying the same thing. That's not quite answering the question. He's getting closer, though. He's being pinned down on it. Derbyshire was going to go full dog with a bone over it, though, and she said it a third time. Is it, though, from what you've seen? Bunny caught in headlights time it was. She really wasn't pushing very hard. I thought this guy was supposed to be a good speaker, but then it's very hard to lie convincingly to someone who can smell a rat in a heartbeat, and there was very much a whiff of something verminous about Screechy by this point. He came back at her, though, with, we're going to have to see as the facts emerge. If it was anyone else, I'd be saying to Derbyshire, I'll put him out of his misery, he's done. But no, let's not. It's Streeting, and she clearly felt likewise. She tried a different tack this time, though. She went on to say, the UN says it is breaking international law. Amnesty says it is breaking international law. The Red Cross is saying it's breaking international law. And held it in the air. Silence. Presented with other opinions, Wesley. Go on, dig yourself out of this one. Weasel around this. Well, he said, Accusations where Israel is being accused of breaking international law need to be properly investigated. And I think particularly when it comes to accusations of, for example, the use of white phosphorus that is prohibited under international law, when it comes to specific targets, schools, hospitals, protected under international law, the complication comes in when Hamas are using those buildings as facilities to launch attacks. But in terms of the scale of civilian loss of life, I will understand why people are calling for an immediate ceasefire. But we've got to be really realistic about this. When you've got Hamas, which is threatening to carry out the same sort of attacks again and again, and an Israeli government that is saying we've got to take out Hamas, we're not going to see a ceasefire soon enough to save lives. Humanitarian pauses could save lives in a way it did just the other night, when Jordan did an airdrop of aid in. Israel ceased fire overnight to get the aid in. That's the practical difference that can be made. It's not a panacea, but it is the immediate humanitarian response that the people of Gaza desperately need. Yeah, and Israel can bomb and destroy that aid as soon as they've stopped pausing, as opposed to a ceasefire where they don't start again. A ceasefire will come too late to save lives, he said. Well, the sooner you start calling for one, you ridiculous pimple of a man, the more lives you save in the end. It takes talks and negotiations to get to that point. Aid agencies and the UN all want a ceasefire because it's the obvious solution that always has to come for conflicts to end. Stupid politicians bought and paid for by the Israel lobby who are on one side of this conflict do not want that. Streeting has never been involved with the UN to know how they operate and the processes they use. He's never worked in the region. He's a career politician basically straight from uni. Yet he reckons he knows better than all of these organisations over the value of a ceasefire. As much as Starmer is proving to be a target for organised campaigning against in a bid to lose his seat, Streeting is putting himself on the radar of a lot of people to have likewise done to him, hence the protests outside of his office locally. Across the demographic spectrum, he is upsetting people in his own constituency. He only has a majority of just over 5,000. He could easily lose his seat with a concerted effort if people really want him gone. And it doesn't seem to be dawning on him any more than his boss that this is becoming a bigger and bigger issue amongst voters. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Starmer's position on a ceasefire to his front benchers now is you will be sacked for formally backing one again, triggering the first resignation from that front bench, and I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so it would appear that Rishi Sunak has attempted to have the pro-Palestine march in London on Armistice Day stopped by dragging in and trying to convince Met Police Commissioner Mark Rowley to do so. But in uncustomary style for the Met, they've told Sunak they will not do that. We're not going to do what you want us to do this time. People still have free speech, freedom of expression, and the freedom to protest and to demonstrate for a cause they believe in. It's still theirs by right to take. What made this an even weaker action by our spineless Prime Minister is that the Met Police confirmed all of this days ago, yet Sunak has still tried to clamp down on our civil rights again anyway, our protected human rights, to stand up for Palestine. Because rich boy Rishi might have told Benjamin Netanyahu that he hopes he wins, but the loss of life on the scale that we've seen in Gaza, the breaches of international law, allegedly as they remain until properly investigated, of course, but the loss of civilian life on the scale we've seen, it surely makes that a moot point. Yet it is a point that people are horrified by sufficiently that they will march, will stand up and be counted, will take a stand against until our governmental leaders who are supposed to serve us start listening to what the majority in this country actually want, rather than the interests of their own donors, which is a ceasefire. Right, so little Rishi, he spat the dummy. He's been stamping his size 13 feet, kid size obviously, because Mark Rowley, the Met Police Commissioner, has repeated what the Met Police said days ago, that the pro-Palestine march planned for Saturday on Armistice Day will go ahead because there is no reason to stop it. Between him and Braverman, they've claimed offence. They've claimed that there will be damage. They've claimed that there will be violence and fallout. They've claimed there will be desecration. They've claimed it'll be in poor taste. But backing a country currently bombing an inescapable strip of land where half the inhabitants are kids is more than in poor taste to me. It's utterly depraved and sickening. But then you're Tories, aren't you? Sunak is a sunk Prime Minister anyway. He's done. We're sick of the Tories and their depravity. But this pro-Israel stance in the face of everything we are witnessing thanks to social media, and also foreign media, it has to be said, so often so much better than our own billionaire-owned press because they present the news instead of trying to make it. We're more aware of this genocide than we have been previously in previous conflicts, and the truth of it in real time in a way we've never seen before. More awake to the reality than we ever have been before. So Sunak can have his sulk, and very much has in the form of his statement on this matter, which reads, "This weekend, people around the UK will come together in a quiet reflection to remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice for this country. It is not hyperbole to say that we are beneficiaries of an inheritance born of that sacrifice. It is because that sacrifice is so immense that Saturday's planned protest is not just disrespectful, but offends our heartfelt gratitude to the memory of those who gave so much that we may live in freedom and peace today. But part of that freedom is the right to peacefully protest, and the test of that freedom is whether our commitment to it can survive the discomfort and frustration of those who seek to use it, even if we disagree with them. We will meet that test and remain true to our principles." This afternoon I asked the Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley to come to Downing Street and provide reassurances that the police are taking every step necessary to safeguard remembrance services, provide reassurance to those who wish to pay their respects across the country, and keep the public safe from disorder this weekend. It's welcome that the police have confirmed that the march will be away from the Cenotaph, and they will ensure the timings do not conflict with any remembrance events. There remains the risk of those who seek to divide society using this weekend as a platform to do so. That is what I discussed with the Metropolitan Police Commissioner in our meeting. The Commissioner is committed to keep the Met Police's posture under constant review based on the latest intelligence about the nature of the protests. And finally, to our veterans and their families, I assure you that we will do everything it takes to protect this special weekend for you and our country as we come together to reflect on those who protected our freedom. I would argue that those going out and marching this weekend are also protecting our freedoms, because this government have tried to lean on the police to get this protest banned. This government have actually tried to scrap our human rights and compile their own Bill of Rights, which definitely wouldn't be the same thing. And the Met has, to their credit, for once stood by us and our rights and not bowed to political pressure from an unelected PM trying to impose his diktat. Sunak knew the march was nowhere near the Cenotaph already. It's been said repeatedly for days now that the march is from Hyde Park to the US Embassy. It's at least a mile away from the Senate. It is also not happening at the same time as remembrance services are. Sunak makes out that it is disrespectful. But if it was Ukraine, that would be different, wouldn't it? If you're backing Ukraine and not Palestine, however, then you're a hypocrite. Sunak is, to say the least, one of those in relation to that example. We remember those who fought and died in wars of the past, but countless civilians are amongst those who died too. Do we not remember them as well? And should we not stand against more loss of life too? Wars are pointless because they always end ultimately with peace talks and negotiations, and the longer it takes to get to that point, the more people needlessly die. People are seeing grotesque loss of life in the Middle East right now, and though nobody excuses what Hamas did, the proportionate response to that from Israel has seen 10 times the number of innocent Gazans killed, and the people be driven south in what appears to be a genocide and ethnic cleansing. And our government stands with those committing the genocide. If Sunak was so affronted by people marching for Armistice, marching for a ceasefire on Armistice Day, then perhaps he should have thought about being on the side of the majority of British people and not the side of Benjamin Netanyahu. Don't let Sunak try and pretend he's intervened here, because he hasn't. Of course, if he was so worried about disorder and hooliganism over this weekend, he might have done well to have locked SUella Braverman away from the public eye for the last week. And no, I'm not talking about anybody turning up to the demonstration this weekend armed with a tent. The hard-right EDL and the Football Lads Alliance are apparently planning to target pro-Palestinian activities this weekend, and you can't say Braverman hasn't been encouraging this with their constant reference to hate marches by the left in relation to Palestinian demonstrations. It's certainly the left that those hate groups from the hard right are aiming for. If there is disruption on Saturday, if there is desecration of war memorials, it won't be from the pro-Palestine marches, but you watch Braverman quickly come out blaming them for it. Violence that will ensue from another war, only in this case, it'll be another SUella Braverman-induced culture war, her chasing headlines. I genuinely think she wants to see pro-Palestinian demonstrators beaten in the streets. That's our Home Secretary for us, folks. And as if on cue, she got a piece out in the Murdoch Times today in relation to all of this, accusing the Met Police of bias now, thus endangering police officers too. Just to prove how out of control she is, Downing Street apparently didn't sign off on her little rant in the right-wing rag, having suggested changes to it, which she has ignored. Sunak is so weak he can't even control his own ministers, but especially her. Little wonder there's people pondering whether she's literally trying to get the sack right now so she can stand in a post-election leadership contest. But will Sunak act or just let her get even worse? That's his choice. So we have a pro-Israel government condemning a peace protest, trying to get it banned and failing, where the Home Secretary has now incited violence from the far right to descend upon Saturday's march, along with now getting it aimed at the Met Police too, and we're still pondering if she'll not still keep her job despite all of that. I sincerely wish everyone taking part in Saturday's pro-Palestine, pro-peace ceasefire marches across the country on this the very best. Solidarity to you all. Please be safe though, because it seems the biggest danger to that right now is coming from our own government. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Braverman's rhetoric, on the other hand, has likely ensured the marches will be huge as people go out of their way to defy her. Such is the British way. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so last night, again, Israel had been deliberately targeting hospitals in Gaza, where refugees are assembling, unable to evacuate. Sick people, babies in incubators who cannot go, children, and the staff staying behind to treat them, standing by these people though it may cost them their own lives. One small display of humanity where otherwise there isn't any. The excuse is given for these atrocities, for these deliberate strikes against civilian infrastructure, when Israel know that civilians are not just in these buildings, but concentrated in these buildings, is that Hamas are hiding amongst them, and therefore civilian casualties are unavoidable as they defend themselves, though how many of those casualties are acceptable versus the number of Hamas operatives they have successfully targeted, they won't tell us. Airstrikes around the Indonesian hospital in Gaza, the Al-Nasser Children's Hospital, I'll say again, Children's Hospital, was actually hit, and more strikes around the Al-Shifa Hospital, the largest hospital in the Gaza Strip. Israel have attempted to justify this with video proof of what they say is a Hamas tunnel in footage taken of the Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Hospital for Rehabilitation and Prosthetic Hospital. But as has been the case before, the truth is anything but what the Israeli Defense Force say it is. Right, so yet more targeting of hospitals by Israel in Gaza has taken place, always on the word of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, saying there are legitimate targets there. And nobody ever seems to question that in our media. It is just accepted that what they are saying is true, but with no attempt being made to avoid civilian casualties, the number of which has already topped 10,000. These are war crimes being carried out, whilst our leaders just sit there in silence, sit on their hands and don't say or do anything about it. Israel has a right to defend itself, they say. True, no argument about that, despite the fact, though, that they are openly bombing a small strip of land where half the population are under 18, and also under their occupation. Also a war crime, also against international law. I really don't see how they can call it self-defence then, when they aren't fighting back an enemy in their own territories. But there we go. It was early on in the most recent military action that an IDF spokesperson showed a conversation between two apparent Hamas operatives. You might remember I did a video on this. That turned out to have been two separate conversations clipped together to try and justify the airstrike on another hospital, the Al-Ali Baptist Hospital, which Israel at the time vehemently denied. Yet here we are with several being hit as airstrikes around the area seem designed not to deliberately target Hamas, but more to convince more people to move south, head towards the Egyptian border at Rafah, where they can then be pushed out of Gaza completely into the Sinai Desert and complete the ethnic cleansing that appears to be happening before our eyes, all, again, under the auspices of rooting out Hamas. The Al-Nasser Children's Hospital hit, tanks on the lawn trapping people in the Al-Naziri Children's Hospital. Just what is their deal with kids in hospitals? The Al-Quds and the Indonesian hospital were in the firing line too last night. The Al-Shifa hospital's outpatients clinics were targeted. And then this beastly thing, the Hellfire R9X, produced by Lockheed Martin, which has pop-out blades instead of a warhead in it. Hardly a targeted strike with artillery like that, is it? That targeted their car park and courtyard. That's designed for maximum carnage in a small area. That's not designed to take underground tunnels out. That's designed to maim and kill whichever poor souls happen to be too close to it, be they Hamas or civilian, indiscriminately, because a missile can't tell the difference, can it? The targeting of medical centres is shameless and deliberate, but one other hospital that Israel have themselves highlighted might have just undermined their alleged excuses for the hospitals and other civilian targets that they're choosing. And just as their incompetent fakery was exposed previously, this latest piece of evidence they've supplied has now been debunked too. Now, the claim has long been that Hamas are hiding in tunnels, isn't it? Running under these institutions, they've deliberately done so to hide behind civilians, and to prove this, the IDF have come up with a photograph taken within the grounds, or of the grounds, of the Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Hospital for Rehabilitation and Prosthetic Hospital. It's quite a mouthful, that name for that hospital, isn't it? Which they say shows the entrance to one of these Hamas tunnels. Well, it doesn't look very carved out by terrorists because it is a perfectly square hatch. Now, hospitals, amongst other buildings, are protected under international law, and deliberately targeting them is a war crime. So it is important that Israel can prove this if they should have their day in The Hague, as I hope they will, and they damn well should, because they don't seem to be going out of their way to avoid hospitals anymore based on their antics last night. But this particular piece of evidence ought to be a significant exhibit if any war crimes trial ever materialises in the future, because this isn't a Hamas tunnel, it's a water tank. The hospital, as the name says, specialises in rehabilitation and prosthetics, and the water tank is used to fill rehabilitation and therapeutic pools, as well as provide water for the grounds, and is a water supply in case of emergency. Now, as for who has broken this news and exposed it, we again have foreign media to thank for that, and in this instance, it is Sanad, which is the digital investigation agency of Al Jazeera, the Qatari-based state media outlet. Now, some might question the independence of this outlet. Goodness knows Western media does a lot, but given that Qatar has broken off relations with Israel due to their actions, some might imply some bias at work here too. They aren't going to want to paint Israel in a positive light. But actually, they couldn't be more perfectly positioned to expose this particular latest idea fairy tale. You see, with Al Jazeera and therefore Sanad being Qatari-based, they had access to all manner of materials in relation to this particular hospital, because Qatar happened to build it. I made mention of how much of a mouthful of a name this particular hospital is to say. But the short name for this particular hospital is just the Qatari Hospital. And they brought it into use just 4 years ago, actually, back in 2019. Sanad, therefore, had access not just to satellite imagery of what is going on then and now, but they had plans for the hospital at their fingertips. They could access archives of its construction, literal video footage of it being built. And they were even able to speak to the people who worked on it, notably the Qatari engineers who ran the project. Amongst all of this was the construction of this particular hatchway, this portal during construction and what it led to. And for Israel to be right in what they're saying, that would mean Qatar had to have been working directly with Hamas to build their tunnels at the same time as the hospital was being built. And well, that would be a very serious allegation to make, wouldn't it? Well, they needn't worry, thanks to Sanad, because footage they obtained show it wasn't actually connected to anything, let alone a tunnel. It was just a water reservoir. The sort of thing this particular institution would very much need, given Israel's penchant for switching the water off to Gaza. One of the engineers interviewed by Sanad said, "I worked for months on the construction of the Sheikh Hamad Hospital for Prosthetics. The occupation army showed a concrete hatch in the eastern side of the hospital. It was the hatch of an underground water tank. Visible above the ground are the concrete hatch, a metal lid, and a pressure equalization hatch used to expel air when filling the tank with water." The only thing Israel had confirmed is that there was a water tank on the hospital grounds. That they claim this is Hamas should alarm the international community, though, and especially the UN, that war crimes are being committed here with Israel striking hospitals. Because if this easily debunked nonsense is what passes for Israeli intelligence, then their intelligence is pretty thick, and Israel thinks we're stupid enough to believe them. I didn't think there was much in this world you could trust less than what comes out of the mouths of the likes of Keir Starmer or Boris Johnson, but Israeli intelligence seems to have managed it. Every allegation of a Hamas tunnel next to or near a Gazan hospital should be treated with great suspicion by the international community. They claim Hamas are riding an ambulance, is hiding in schools. They are using Hamas as an excuse to apparently indiscriminately destroy civilian infrastructure, and their basis for doing so has now repeatedly been shown to be highly questionable. To date, 63 paramedics, pharmacists, lab technicians, physiotherapists and optometrists have been killed on top of all the doctors and nurses which have been more widely reported. We need a ceasefire to sort this out, to stop wanton Israeli destruction and death, as they appear to be set on doing, set on inflicting. And the truth of these tunnels needs to come out, because it would appear that Israel is committing war crimes, or the case against them being built over this hinges on securing evidence before they end up destroying it. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Israel implicated themselves in that bombing of the Al-Ali hospital, so it's no hardship to believe they've manufactured a story once again to suit their actions. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so nothing quite says I'm on the side of the Jewish community, I'm on the side of Israel, quite like sacking a Jewish member of staff for organising a pro-Palestine rally. But this is exactly what Keir Starmer has done this week, because where he might use the term Jewish, we all should know by now that he means Zionist. Under his leadership, more Jewish members of the Labour Party have been purged, expelled or suspended than under any other Labour leader. Because where Labour speaks of anti-Semitism, what they really mean is anti-Zionism. And there are plenty of Jewish people in the world who are anti-Zionist, who are against what they are observing happening in Israel, because this isn't about a dream of a land for Jewish people now, the concept of which in and of itself offends the beliefs of many Jews, but has become synonymous with the eradication and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people, who are seen as less than human by the apartheid Israeli state. That's what Zionism in practice became, so it should be opposed. However, when one of Keir Starmer's senior members of staff, Jewish himself, organised for Palestine, helped organise a rally for them, that became a sacking offence for the self-confessed ruthless Labour leader and Zionist without qualification, Keir Starmer. Right, so let's start with a nod towards that ruthlessness claim of Keir Starmer's here before we come on to that preposterous and offensive sacking. Starmer has gone on record in Esquire magazine, no less, saying ruthlessness is a good thing. The bulk of the article is quite nauseating, to be honest. There are puff pieces on politicians, and then there's this. It's a cup of tea with 8 sugars, kind of sickening. Yet again we have the old "my father was a toolmaker, my mother was a nurse" routine. But the one line that makes this article worthy of drawing attention to was Starmer's attitude towards anti-Semitism and his treatment of Jeremy Corbyn, because in the article he said, "Sometimes you have to be ruthless to be a good leader." My first instinct was to ask, where is this good leader then, because I haven't seen them. But of course he's talking about himself. Ruthlessness, the dictionary definition of the word, though it's a word we probably all feel we are familiar with, is the quality of lacking pity or compassion for others. It is literally the opposite of compassion. I think compassion is a good quality for a leader, therefore ruthlessness never can be. But ruthlessness is what we've seen from Starmer, certainly regarding Corbyn, certainly regarding all of those the Labour Party has purged. You can certainly point to Starmer's ruthlessness in that. And also that it is reflected in the decisions he's made policy-wise, breaking his promises, his pledges, his vows to the public on what he stands for, what he stood for as Labour leader when he was trying to get elected to that post, so that nobody really knows what he would do actually in power, and certainly nobody who voted for him knew what he would do later on. But admitting to being ruthless is probably the most honest thing Starmer's ever actually said, and there's no shortage of evidence to point that out. It is a quality of the bad leader, of the dictator. Democracy and ruthlessness do not go hand in hand. And his ruthlessness, of course, paired up with his Zionist without qualification position, makes for a very poor prospect for Prime Minister indeed. A leader who, lest we forget, makes the point once more, still staunchly refuses to listen to the mood of the general public or even his own party on the matter of a ceasefire. And it's not letting up, as his latest sacking has shown. Of course, the Labour Party hasn't said they've sacked this chap, a man by the name of Ben Soffa. They've moved him on. But the fact of the matter is he likely knew he was on borrowed time working for Team Keith as head of digital campaign, since Soffa also happens to be the National Secretary of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. Now, some media outlets have reported on this sacking. The scum notably have used the fact that Soffa worked for Labour and was high up in the PSC too to attack Starmer. But it was never a secret, despite shock revelations about it, as GB News, GBB's put it. Soffa is apparently involved in the organisation of the PSC's march this Saturday on Armistice Day, and it seems he's been sacked for having a desire to see an armistice, a ceasefire called for on the most suitable day of the year to call for one, as we honour those who fought and died for us before a ceasefire was obviously eventually called, before any more lives were needlessly lost in whatever conflict you care to mention.
I know Starmer had put the hard word on his front benchers not to back a ceasefire anymore, not to sign the early day motion that was calling for one, but who knew his staff had no freedom of speech or expression on this matter either? The very rights those who Starmer will be wearing a poppy for and laying a wreath in memory to this weekend literally died for, so we could still have. Acting as he is here isn't holding their memory and their sacrifice to heart. Instead, it shows that his acquiescence to Israel and his aversion to a ceasefire there is more important to him. Soffer himself isn't exactly an angel, though, in all of this. For someone who has worked for Starmer for years, he'd been in his post longer than Starmer's been in his. If you can work for Starmer, that's not exactly a positive reflection on you, is it? Despite his senior position in the PSC, he'd been watching all the purging going on. He's refused to deny ever working with the former Israeli intelligence operative, Asaf Kaplan, who Starmer employs as a social listening and organising manager. In other words, a social media spy, to my mind, is what it means. And recently, the PSC suspended 4 members of its Manchester branch for, of all things, showing solidarity with Palestine, which is pretty weird, isn't it? When can you show support and not for them, then, within the PSC? It's very confusing. Still, with Soffer likely involved with that decision, given his seniority in the organisation, or at least being aware of it and tacit in supporting it, not coming out opposing it, it's a reflection of there being a limit for how far this guy's pro-Palestinian advocacy does go. However, that in turn reflects on Starmer, does it not? Given this guy's clearly worked for quite a while as part of his regime, worked for this long for him, yet now he's got to go over a one-day pro-Palestine demonstration. Zionist without qualification indeed. How very ruthless. Perhaps Soffer will buck up now he's free of the shackles of the Starmer regime. The sad thing is, looking at Twitter this morning about this story, though, it seems Starmer is actually earning plaudits for doing this. Soffer might be restrained in how far he will go in his Palestinian support, despite his senior position with the PSC, but that's still a damn sight further than Starmer, and every assault on pro-Palestine voices that he's made will ever go is a win for those struggling to wrestle back control of the media narrative in favour of Israel and Netanyahu in the media, isn't it? We can't let this go back in the box again. Tomorrow's march is set to be the biggest scene in London in decades, potentially ever. Such is the anger and this country of our leaders' positions on Palestine and Israel. So let's remember what that is for, rather than enable Starmer to seize the narrative on it and those supporting him in the media, and let the machinations going on behind the scenes detract from what tomorrow is really all about. Because we need a ceasefire, and that's what we're all calling for. And we need to keep levelling pressure on our politicians to back one, or else we're going to have to take our votes elsewhere, to take a stand. It's the one bit of power we all have, ourselves, after all. And the SNP and the Green Party and Plaid Cymru will be more than happy to take those votes, I'm sure, as they remain the only UK parties backing that call for a ceasefire. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this in the comments below too and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Starmer's anti-ceasefire stance has seen him lose control fully of an entire council now after calls for his resignation went ignored by the council leadership, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so for all of SUella Braverman's performative pretense at giving a damn about remembering our war dead, remembering those who fought and died for our freedoms, for all of her claims that the peace march organised between Hyde Park and the US Embassy today, a full mile away from the Cenotaph, I might add, the far right being the ones who have desecrated the day, as it turns out. Braverman said the pro-Palestinians, the left wing, were the threat to their memories, to this day of armistice, a threat to the sanctity of today, and for all of Rishi Sunak's sulky statement the other day voicing his disappointment that the Met Police were allowing that peace march scheduled for this afternoon at time of writing to go ahead. No basis for it to have been stopped after all. With the scenes being witnessed around the Cenotaph as I've been writing this, it's a damn good job the police were not being deployed entirely to stop the peace march, when the hate mob, when Suella's black shirts, Braverman's black shirts, have already overwhelmed them in Whitehall. Make no mistake, SUella Braverman has incited this with what she has been saying for days and weeks now, and what she has been doing. She has been attacked by her own party for that, let alone any opposition parties also weighing in on her for her hateful conduct. And this is the end result, what we have seen today in Whitehall around the Cenotaph. She drove this. She's got to be sacked before the day's out. Right, so the word scum It's one heavily contested when applied to politicians. The Tories didn't like it much when Angela Rayner called them scum, but scum they are when they have allowed a reprehensible hate figure like SUella Braverman to remain in her post, to even get into that post to begin with, let's be honest. One of the great offices of state, with the vile hard-right rhetoric she's become known for, that she's constantly coming out with and which she's ramped up in recent days and weeks. Her talk of hate marches, after all, when applied to the rumoured to be record-breaking pro-Palestine march scheduled for later today as I'm writing this. Though with what is happening in Whitehall around the Cenotaph right now as I am writing this, she ought to have looked towards those her words have incited. We knew the far right were coming. Social media has been awash with the words of the likes of the English Defence League and the Football Lads Alliance saying they've been called to arms and have flocked to London, the excuse of causing a commotion and violence as they always do, too much to resist, and with the Home Secretary's comments egging them on, able to be used as reasoning for their backwards, slope-headed thinking, braying, "England till I die." They've headed to the capital dragging their knuckles all the way. She's encouraged the far right. She's encouraged more scum to come to London. Hard right, fascist scum at that. And the scenes coming from Whitehall and around the Cenotaph as the rest of us observed a respectful 2-minute silence. They saw the police, and to shouts of, "Let's have them," and "You aren't English anymore," the police got utterly overwhelmed. That was a hate march. That was a surge of vileness. The police were spread woefully thin. I can't imagine why there were so few of them there in Whitehall. I can only assume that perhaps there are a lot of police at Hyde Park because that's where Braverman demanded of Mark Rowley that that's where he deploy them, since he wouldn't cancel the march. He had no grounds to do so. And with speakers lined up to address the demonstrators there from 12 noon, there will certainly be a police presence there. We're told there are 1,850 officers on duty in the capital today. They definitely weren't all at the Cenotaph, given that this is what they deployed to guard it. More did show up to literally keep the mob from the monument, literally with their bodies, because the barriers proved insufficient in and of themselves. But we've been saying all week the pro-Palestine march isn't where the trouble will be, or at least won't be the cause of the trouble, because we've seen it all kick off well away from there, back in Whitehall, by the right wing. The Met blatantly weren't prepared for the pot of hate that Braverman has been stirring up all week, and that is their failing. The mob in Whitehall quickly broke through the police cordon. They completely gave up on stopping people breaking through barriers, and bear in mind, they could have been armed with anything. Surely they style themselves as patriots. I can only assume the bottles they were throwing at police were patriotic bottles then. But it can only take one individual with a spray can or another individual with a hammer to cause significant damage 24 hours before Sunak and Starmer pretend to give a damn about those who fought and died for us, along with all the civilian casualties of past wars that rarely ever get a mention but absolutely should, when both leaders are so set on seeing more death and destruction in Gaza. Imagine them laying a wreath before the Cenotaph, graffitied in swastikas or something tomorrow. You think it wouldn't happen, that these people wouldn't do it? How many of them have such imagery tattooed on their beer bellies as they swan in, half naked, draped in Union flags? The police rally from the footage I've seen were lucky they managed to stop them at the feet of the Cenotaph itself. If you honestly think they wouldn't be so disrespectful, they didn't exactly observe 2 minutes silence here, did they? Do you not remember that time Paul Golding of Britain First went to the Cenotaph with a pair of women's knickers on his head? They couldn't give less of a shit, and neither can SUella Braverman. The events of today, the disorder and violence being seen around that monument, which has been such a topic of being respected and not violated, certainly this last week, in light of the coming demonstration for a ceasefire coming later today, has been driven by her words. She has shamelessly weaponised this weekend for her own political ambitions, for her own ends, nothing else. Her own desire to lead the Tory party and lead this country, God forbid. All this violence is about her, and she'll still, no doubt, if given the chance, blame the left for it. If she had a shred of decency, she'd resign seeing what she's done. Instead, she's probably watching those scenes unfold and was grinning at them. It's not prominent left figures being spotted there, though, is it? Stephen Yaxley Lennon, better known as Tommy Robinson, was there, along with the likes of Lawrence Fox and Calvin Robinson, formerly of GB News, GBBs, though hardly in any, and I use this in the very, very loosest sense of the words, journalistic role, since both have now been sacked by the channel, and good riddance to them. Of course, Braverman would be just shouting into the void if not for right-wing rags encouraging her and backing up their rhetoric. The Jewish Chronicle, folks, published a piece by rampant Islamophobe Douglas Murray this week which carried the implication that the Nazis weren't all bad. The Daily Express, the Tory Graph, the Daily Fail, notably the paper with the pro-Nazi background, have all backed Braverman's calls to have the peace protest this afternoon banned, despite the violence very much being committed by those more closely aligned to the Home Secretary herself. I'll single out the Evening Standard particularly for a hosing down over this, as they paired up the headline over the police and groups trying to get to the Cenotaph with a picture of pro-Palestine demonstrators, clearly not from today and clearly not from anywhere near Whitehall. And it's important to reiterate that point about the peace protest again and again so it sinks in with more people. The pro-Palestine march, the ceasefire march that is taking place this afternoon, they are at Hyde Park, nowhere near the Cenotaph. They are over a mile away. This is not them getting involved with the far right, but with only Regent's Park and a bit more between them once their peace march does begin this afternoon, I do genuinely fear. I fear it will be a foregone conclusion now, seeing the number of fascists in Whitehall, that they will leave there and head towards the peace march when it begins to intercept it somewhere along the line in order to cause disorder there. The Braverman will without doubt try and pin that on the left simply for exercising their free right to peacefully protest and demand a ceasefire and demand our government call for one instead of continuing to back Israel and continue to supply them with more weapons to kill more innocent Gazans with in the hope they hit some Hamas operatives while they're at it. Well, it's entirely on the government there. At this moment in time, numerous other media outlets are putting the blame firmly where it belongs, referring to the thugs in Whitehall as right-wing and pointing to Braverman as the one being accused of inciting this. Sky News, notably, all very careful in their language though, but we've all heard what she has been saying. We've all seen what she's been doing. We've seen Sunak spinelessly going along with her narrative, even if he can't bring himself to repeat her wording on such matters. SUella Braverman has incited violence in the capital on Armistice Day of all days, the day that literally means ceasefire, and as Home Secretary her position is now without doubt untenable. It was before, it's without doubt now, there's no excusing this. She has to go. She won't resign, she must be sacked therefore. And Sunak needs to grow a set and do it, or he can go too, because we can't afford to have this country led by somebody who can't even defend today of all days from his most rancid of MPs. It is inexcusable, it is unforgivable. Braverman is far too dangerous to ever be left in a position of responsibility and power, and those voters who have her on their ballot have a responsibility, I will put it on them, a responsibility at the next election to ensure she is removed from Parliament. How anyone can countenance wanting to be represented by her, I really don't know. But you're sick in the head, in my opinion, if she's your preferred option. Poll after poll shows she is the most unpopular MP in Parliament, and with good reason. These are her black shirts at the Cenotaph, Braverman's black shirts. And her career needs to end because of what she's incited, because of what she has encouraged, which desecrates the meaning of Armistice Day, which will now cast a shadow now over this entire Remembrance Weekend, and which we're unlikely to have seen the end of yet. Sunak realistically has until the end of today to do something about her, but I'm not going to hold my breath. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content up daily. Do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where all the warning signs were there already that this will be the outcome of Braverman's behaviour, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so the SNP have tabled a motion to be voted on next Wednesday, calling for a ceasefire in Israel and Gaza, and vote to take a position of calling for that formally, adopting that as the UK government position on this matter. Keir Starmer, that Zionist without qualification, ardently sticking to his pro-Israel narrative, vehemently opposed to a ceasefire in favour of humanitarian pauses where aid is allowed in as long as it can be bombed again straight afterwards, isn't just whipping his MPs to abstain on this vote. He's whipping them to vote against it, which will effectively mean voting with the Tories to block this motion. But his reasoning behind this is the most cowardly, craven and self-serving position he could possibly take, because he's saying he'd rather vote with the Tories than the SNP because it would harm Labour's electoral position in Scotland. He's choosing to weaponise Scotland to oppose a Gaza ceasefire and save lives. How much more sick can this man get? Right, so the Scottish vote the twisted Starmer thinks he's on his uppers in Scotland over, presumably based off the back of his victory in Rutherglen and Hamilton West recently, that by-election. But his position of abject opposition to a ceasefire has put him at odds with Scottish Labour. And as much as Labour in Scotland are regarded as little more than a branch office for Westminster, the Scottish Labour leader, Anna Sarwar, despite being a Starmerite sort of a chap, has publicly called for a ceasefire. He's completely at odds with Starmer's position on this. So how will he react, I wonder, to Starmer suddenly weaponising Scotland in order to see off a motion brought by the Scottish National Party? As the third party in Westminster, the SNP are allowed to table motions themselves on just 3 days of the year. They do not get a lot of say. And they've chosen to use one of them for this. A motion calling for a ceasefire, not only in line with the feelings of the people of Scotland, but the majority of people in the UK as a whole, 3/4 of whom want a ceasefire, but that view being woefully underrepresented and ignored by those elected to office. Starmer has already faced significant opposition from within his own party over his stance, and he's still refusing to budge an inch on it. Whatever he wants is what goes. And too bad if Labour members or MPs still think their party is a democratic institution, because it isn't. It's now ruled by diktat, and what Starmer wants, Starmer gets. But he's got away with that viewpoint for long enough. Something's had to give, got to give, especially on something like this. He's lost upwards of 48 councillors nationwide, lost majority control of one council, lost complete control of another, lost vast swathes of the Muslim vote in this country, which has typically been a Labour vote, and had one of his frontbench MPs resign. But he's also being warned he could be looking at another 10 frontbench resignations if he insists on pushing ahead with this. He's made signing Richard Bergen's reposted early day motion calling for a ceasefire a sacking offence for the front bench now, which triggered the resignation of that one front bencher, Imran Hussain. But more will likely follow if forced to vote against something they put their name to supporting previously. 18 front bench Labour MPs signed Bergen's first EDM before the King's Speech wiped it out, which is why he's reposted it now. 17 of them, shamefully, have so far resisted signing the EDM again, but actually formally voting against it, well, that's got to be another matter, surely. That's something they'd need to justify to their constituents, who, after all, are supposed to be served first and foremost. And going up to them and saying, well, I wanted to save my shadow ministerial backside instead, well, that won't go down well, will it? So Starmer has deployed the whips to carry out his instructions to his MPs. But the excuse they've been given in order to push this vote against a ceasefire is Labour's position in Scotland. Nothing to do with Israel, nothing to do with Gaza. The SNP must be opposed because really it is all about Scotland, you see. The whips are reportedly telling MPs that to vote against their party position on this, to vote with the SNP, to vote for a ceasefire would totally undermine Labour's position in Scotland, and that if Labour were in government, they would have to vote against their own government in order to do this. Well, Labour are not in government for one. They're supposed to be opposing the government instead of supporting them, as they are here, choosing instead to oppose another opposition party because of Starmer's position. And that's all it comes down to, because Starmer is obsessed with taking seats off the SNP, and he's obsessed with backing up Israel. I'm not convinced the people of Scotland, who are amongst the most politically aware and astute voters in this country, I feel, they tend to be far better informed than average. I can't say I'm convinced that voting against a ceasefire for more bombing and more killing of innocent civilians, including so many children, is going to be a vote winner amongst them. I don't know why it's a vote winner for anyone, but then the stupid poll lead Labour still has just shows the get the Tories out mentality is still winning out, even if politically nothing will change. A lot of Labour voters in waiting are going to be very angry that nothing changes after next year's likely general election, but seemingly so many cannot be told. Of course, it isn't Labour in Scotland at all, because this has been Starmer's position from the beginning. This merely shows how shameless he is in trying to concoct some kind of a rational argument for his actions, which are sociopathic, completely insane, compassionless nonsense. There is no sane argument at all for not calling for a ceasefire, because all conflicts end with the calling of one, followed by negotiation and the permanent cessation of hostilities. Peace. That Starmer and Sunak too will not call for. One is because they've chosen a side, and it is the side of the aggressor, of the occupier, who they would rather see win, which looking at things means genocide and ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip rather than peace. The SNP are absolutely right in this and have the numbers in Parliament to bring this motion, push this motion. If only we could vote for them all, eh? If only all of us could vote for them. But thankfully in England, we have the Green Party as our pro-ceasefire option. We do have an option here. It's the only party worth a vote right now for the majority of us. Wales Air Plaid Cymru too as an option. Forcing this vote in one direction is going to cause Keir Starmer problems, especially if a significant number of his party defy him on this. He will look weak because of it. He will look both weak and dictatorial if he carries out mass sackings and suspensions over it, because people have voted with their conscience just because he doesn't have one. But I totally believe that is what will happen, because keeping his donors depends on it. Of course, it isn't just me calling him out. Many others are too. Amr Anwar, the defence solicitor who worked with bereaved COVID families in Scotland, weighed in on this. He said, "You say the choice on Wednesday is to stick together or support the SNP over the Labour Party and undermine our party in Scotland. No, Keir Starmer, the choice is to do the right thing and vote for a ceasefire, not to order your MPs not to vote for a ceasefire." Labour National Executive Committee member Mish Rahman said 76% of the British public back a ceasefire. Sunak and Starmer need to align with the will of the majority of the British public. Labour whips using Scotland as an excuse is ridiculous. Scottish Labour leader Sarwar has already called for a ceasefire. Scottish voter Elaine McGurk said, "Why will some Scots vote for Labour? This is playing with lives in Palestine. Voting down a ceasefire motion just because the SNP are bringing it in. How heartless can Labour get? Starmer deserves to be fired by their party. Party before human life is not a good look." SNP leader Humza Yousaf, whose in-laws are still trapped in Gaza. If we're going to talk about hostage taking, what about the people Israel won't let leave who aren't from there? Well, he said, 30 days of bombing, over 10,000 dead, including 4,000 children. If you are not calling for an immediate ceasefire, you are frankly enabling the suffering of so many innocent people. Scotland will be on the right side of history and of humanity. I agree completely, and fair play to him for rising above Starmer's level, but only by sticking by the SNP right now and telling Starmer to do one, just as the people of Scotland have done historically in these last several years. To still do that now, as they side with the Tories, well, the people of Scotland need to do with Starmer what they do with any other Tory. Vote him out. Starmer's position is ridiculous. A problem is members of his party have said that he has created all on his own, for no real gain, no proper reason. There's no point to this. It's just his ideological obsession with supporting Israel, which by his actions in recent weeks, he will do no matter what they do. Backing a Starmer-led Labour is backing an Israel-run Labour in effect. But to now hide behind Scotland as his reasoning for opposing a ceasefire motion shows he's running out of both time and excuses. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Imran Hussein's resignation may just be a flavour of what Starmer is in for next week, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.